All right, all right, all right. So it's 3 o'clock, and I'm gonna go ahead and get started. If you're tuning in and you want to say hi, I really appreciate that. So you can pop into the comments and say hi. Um, but today I thought I wanted to kind of go into more depth with the words, with the meaning making that I'm trying to do. I've been really focusing mostly on the art making, using the paint, the collage, drawing, tracing with stencils. I have thought a little bit about the meaning. I've thought about the images that I'm using. I've thought about some of the words, but I haven't really kind of, I haven't dived into that yet. So that's what I want to do today. I want to dive into the meaning, the messages, the writing element, because I really feel like visual journaling is part art and part writing. So the image and the word are equally as important. And so I'm trying to get at something. I'm trying to understand this notion, this theme of emergence more. So yeah, so if you're tuning in and you want to say hi in the comments, say hi, and you can let us know where you're tuning in from. Um, but today I'm going to be working more with words today. And so over the last week, I've been really kind of almost scared, I guess, to really dive into some of the meaning. And I thought, well, let me go ahead and just kind of visit the words and do some reflecting, because I think that's where the problem comes, is that I have this theme, it's a big theme. I just don't know exactly what I want to explore with it. I don't know what I want to say about it. I don't know what kind of words or messages or things I want to put into this little book. Um, but today I want to kind of start that exploration and see if I can bring something up, if I can discover something, because to me art is a process of discovery. And so even though I have this message, this theme that I want to use, I don't know what I want to specifically say yet. And what I find is that as I work on it, as I work through this process, that the ideas become clearer. So today I'm going to be doing some writing, and if you want to follow along, grab a pen or a pencil, something to write with, and grab something to write on. And I'm going to be doing some writing. I'm not going to do it directly in my journal. Now, if I was working in my big everyday journal, I might write directly in the journal, and I might write directly in the journal for this little one. But for right now, I want to do it on a separate piece of paper that actually I'm going to somehow probably incorporate. And maybe I'll get to that today as well. But anyway, so that's kind of what I'm working on. But of course, you can work on anything that you would like to. But yeah, so thinking thinking about that theme, emergence. What does it really mean? What are some ideas that come up from that? And then how can I start to incorporate some of those ideas into this little book? So that's kind of what I'm going to be working on today. Let me go ahead and switch the camera over. So here's what I have today. I've got my little book. I've got a variety of pens. I even have a metallic pen, and I've got some tracing paper. I'm going to write on the tracing paper because of its translucent quality. It's great for using in the journal. And so that way, the writing that I do in it, I can then eventually put it into the journal. And then I have the list. So last week, I think it was a week ago, I sat down and started thinking about emergence. I came up with this list. And I was looking at this list before I went live today. And there are a couple phrases. So there's a phrase here, bring forth, and then the other one right underneath it, break free. I really like that. If I wanted to, I could use the big theme, my emergence. So you could really use anything that you want as a prompt for the writing. I'm not gonna. I've done some writing with the word emergence. I'm going to focus more on bringing forth and breaking free somehow. And I thought about like, oh well, let me go back. Yesterday I did the I am, so I might start that as as my prompt, like I am bringing forth or I am breaking free. That could be a way to sort of focus in on one of those things. So I'm going to do that in the tracing paper. So let me go ahead and move this out of the way. And I'm just going to leave the tracing paper in the pad for right now. And then that way I can write. And I'm going to do a technique called stream of consciousness writing. And so if you're familiar with my work, you'll be familiar with this technique. I'm going to go ahead and switch back over because that way you don't have to stare at a blank page as I'm explaining this. So stream of consciousness writing is a creative writing technique. You may have done it in high school or in college, but it's a way to let your subconscious kind of take over. It's called a stream of consciousness writing or free writing. And so that idea that you're letting your consciousness, you're just letting it kind of babble. And I always think of it as like, you're composing these sentences in your head. You're thinking these thoughts and you're using words. You're not trying to visualize things. You're trying to specifically like hear a voice in your head. And I was really surprised a couple years ago to find out that not everyone thinks that way, that some people do think in images and in sensations. And I think in words. So whenever I think a thought, I'm really like, I hear my own voice in my head. But anyway, so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to record that voice, and basically I'm trying to write without stopping. I'm trying to get into that flow, trying to allow the words to come out. So it's as if my hand is connected to my head, and whatever words I'm thinking, that's what I'm writing. So if I come to a point where I'm like, oh, my mind just went blank. Oh my goodness, I don't know what to write next. Well, those were words that I was just thinking, so I should have written them down. And the nice thing with a stream of consciousness writing is that if you go off into different directions, off topic, that's fine. You let it flow, you let it go where it needs to go. So because of that, because you're trying to write quickly, you're trying to keep up with your thoughts, you're going to write without stopping, and you're not going to worry about spelling, punctuation. You're not going to worry about making sense. And I'm just going to write. What I like to do is I like to set a timer. Sometimes I don't. So if I have a specific space that I want to fill, so if I have my tracing paper here and I'm like, oh, I want to have a full sheet of writing, I'll just write until I fill up that whole piece of paper. If I don't have that restriction, then I like to time myself around 7 minutes. And usually what I do is I kind of give myself a minute or so to kind of think about this topic. Okay. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set a timer and I'm going to write for 7 minutes. I'm going to write directly on the tracing paper, and then I'll talk about how I can incorporate that into the journal as I'm kind of working after I'm done writing. So yeah, so if you're going to do this along with me, grab a piece of paper, grab something to write with, and pick your topic, your prompt. And that prompt is really going to give you a way to get started. It's going to give you a starting point. And so, like I said, if you go off topic, that's totally fine. So again, it's as if your hand is connected to your mind, and you're just kind of recording those thoughts. And if you do come to a point where your mind goes blank, what you can do is go back and write your prompt over again and just kind of repeat it. So if say I was writing about emergence and emergence was my prompt, I could go back and just emergence, 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 and just write that over and over again. And then after a few times, I'm going to get kind of tired of it. My mind will get back on track and I can pick up my thoughts and keep writing. But it's as if as if your hand's connected to your brain and you're just recording your thoughts. Okay. So anyway, let me switch this back over and I'll go ahead and set my timer, and I'm going to go ahead and write. But like I said, I'm going to give myself a minute to kind of think about that. So I'm going to factor that into the timer. So anyway, let me go ahead and switch this back. Let me set my timer. So I'm going to write for 7 minutes, but I'm going to set my timer for 8 minutes. And I'm going to give myself 1 minute just to think about this topic and maybe start to compose my first sentence. When that minute's up, I'll go ahead and start writing, and I'll write until I hear the timer go off, and then I'll wrap up my writing. So I'm going to start the timer now. like I said, I'm just going to take a minute and just sort of think about this topic. Okay, so my minute's about up. I'm gonna go ahead and take my cap off. Remember, I'm just gonna write for 7 minutes and then I'll wrap up whenever the timer goes off. All right. So I've kind of run out of space. I could have continued, but I only have a couple seconds left. So, and there's my timer. So I did end up um, filling this. I ended up writing pretty quickly. Really got into what I was writing about, um, and so the thing that I really love about the stream of consciousness writing is that it allows me to tap into ideas that perhaps just sitting and thinking about them, I wouldn't be able to bring up. And sometimes I link words together and create things like phrases or thoughts or ideas that all of a sudden it's like bang, like oh okay, that's a really vivid notion, or that is like kind of the essence of what I'm trying to get at. And so over the last 6 days, yeah, I've been working in my journal thinking about what I wanted to really talk about, or the messages that I wanted to use, the meaning that I wanted to make in this journal. But until I actually sit down and start putting words on the paper, or on paper in general, I'm at a loss. And so writing what I just wrote, um, I feel like, okay, I've given myself a lot of clarity about the purpose of this book, and where I want to go. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look over my writing, and I want to pull out key words or phrases. So this is something that I do all the time. I've shared this many times in classes, in live streams, in videos, but it's something that I call operative words. And this is a phrase that came to me. Not It's not something that I invented, but it was a friend of mine, actually a good friend of my buddy David Modler, who he and I are the journal fodder junkies. But when we first started doing workshops, our friend was in one of our workshops, and he was like, "Oh, this is like operative words," and he's a spoken word poet, and he talked about operative words being kind of key words that you really want to stress or emphasize. And even in our language, we use that term operative word to signal out a word that we want to place extra emphasis on. Like, so if we say something and we go, oh, and the word is the operative word, it's like we're trying to place extreme emphasis on that word by saying that it's the operative word. I can never think of a really good example of that. Anyway, um, so anyway, um, I, yeah, so I want to look through my writing, and I want to, um, put these down, or like look through the writing and find these operative words. That's what I'm trying to say. Having a hard time putting my words together. All right, so flip it back over. I'm not going to read through it word by word, and I'm just really looking for things that stand out, like big kind of words or phrases. So I wrote, I mean, my first four words, I am bringing forth. So I stuck with that notion of bringing forth, but later on I mentioned I am breaking free. So I worked both of those sort of prompts in. So I'm not going to highlight those because I already have them. Those are things I've already picked out. But I looked at so even just in the first few lines, there's a phrase here that I really like, and I just took a black pen. Actually, you know what? I'm not even going to use my black pen right now. I'm going to use my silver pen because I want these words to stand out. So I'm going to use a silver pen, and this is a Uniball um, gel impact pen, and it's very similar to the white Signo gel pens, and but it's silver. And so I'm just going to use that, and I'm going to highlight, I'm going to trace, I'm going to outline. So I'm just going to rewrite. So there's this phrase, habits of thought, that I really like. So I'm just going to go over it with the silver. And it's okay if a little bit of the pink shows through. Right now, it might be difficult to see those words. But that's all right. I'm going to come back to them after I'm done. So I'm just going to go through and look for words or short phrases. So I'm going to try to find like 4 or 5 of those kind of words or phrases. And so I can use a different color pen. I could circle them. I could highlight them in some way. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got 5. And right now, it is really hard to kind of see those silvery words, especially depending on how the light's hitting it. So I'm going to take a black pen, and the words up here have had a little bit of chance to dry. So if I just take this black pen, then I can outline the letters. And so that black really helps those silver letters stand out, because the silver is very light, and so the background, the tracing paper, is very light. So it just doesn't have the contrast. So by having a little bit of black ink around it, so almost anytime that I'm using a metallic pen or marker, I usually try to outline it with black. It really kind of depends on what surface it's on. So if it's already on a dark background, it's going to show up better. But if there's not a lot of contrast, then the black really helps it stand out. So I'm doing this now before I do anything with the writing, just so that it's easier to kind of work with the words. And also, it just gives me time to think about what I just wrote, to kind of maybe absorb what I've written, and maybe think about how I might use this writing in my book. Because I want to actually physically put this writing, or at least part of it, into my book, let it become part of the little journal. And I could do this on any paper. This could have been a piece of drawing paper, piece of printer paper, but there's a reason that I'm using the tracing paper. So one of the things that I can think about now is if I want to write these down, and so that way I don't sort of lose them, because as I go to use this in my book, um, maybe I'll forget the words and the phrases, or maybe it'll just, they'll get kind of stuck into a place that's not very obvious. And so one of the things that I like to do is I like to add these to a list that I have. So, I have this list. So, do I add these phrases to that? So that's something to think about. Or sometimes in my big journal, I have a list of all these kind of operative words, because as I work through this, some of these ideas might really become the impetus for something else in my work. So anyway, so like I said, I wrote specifically on tracing paper. I'm going to tear this out. And even just laying it down on the table, you can see it's translucent. So things show through. And that's what I want. Okay. So if I'm thinking about my journal, when I go to glue that in, I could cover entire pages. But I think I want to do this a different way. And so one of the things that I've done a lot is use the paper, but I manipulate it. So I don't just use the whole paper. This is too big for my little journal anyway. I mean, I'd have to cut it up into smaller pieces. But one thing I've done in the past is I've ripped it up and used the bits and pieces and glued them in. But I think with this, I'm going to do another thing that I love to do, and that is use strips. So I'm going to cut the writing and just cut it into strips and glue those in. But I want to actually glue it in order. So I want to lay these down so that it goes in order. Sometimes I'll just cut them all up and I'll glue them in randomly. But with this, I do want it to be in order. So let me grab my glue paper, make some space. So I've got my glue paper, I've got my glue stick, and I've got my little strip. So when I glue this in, now it's too long, but just like I've done before, I'm going to wrap it around so it goes to here. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to glue in those strips in different ways. So actually maybe this gets glued up here, and then it gets wrapped around, and then the next one gets glued in, and then it wraps around, and then that way each strip starts to kind of wrap around different basically different pages, and so the text goes from one page to the next. So anyway, I'm going to glue that in. I just turn it over, and I do want to be careful with the tracing paper. Number one, it's more delicate than regular paper, so it can rip and tear. But the other thing is that it curls. I mean, it curls really badly, even with the glue stick. So I'm going to try to hold it on one side, really spread it with glue, and then sometimes it gets stuck to the glue paper. But with this, I'm always like getting glue all over my fingers whenever I do the tracing paper. But it's just part of the process. So I really want to stick this down, and then I'm going to wrap this around. Now, the one thing with the tracing paper is that it becomes less translucent. So when I put glue on it and glue it in, I mean, you could probably still see it like right here, but it's not as cloudy as it was when I first laid it down. And so with a little bit of glue, it makes really close contact to the surface, and sometimes it kind of almost disappears. So that's one of the reasons I like to use tracing paper, is because it almost disappears. So what I could do is I could continue. So let me go ahead and cut the next strip. So this is like a slow process, and I might not even use all the strips. So that's why I'm going to cut one at a time. so what do I do with this? You know, does this then get glued here and get wrapped around? Or do I think about like, well, this is a strip, so it's like a continuous line. So does that then get turned and do I glue that here? So it just picks up where that one left off. And then maybe what I think I'm going to do that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut. So I'm going to cut, there's an end of a sentence right there. So I'll cut that. And so then this one can get moved down. And maybe that's going to get glued here. So I'll take this and glue that in. But yeah, so the little tracing paper just curls right up. That's the biggest issue. See right there. It's like, okay, now it's really curled up. Because a glue stick does have a little bit of moisture in it. Okay, and then maybe this one gets glued down here. So sometimes I try to grab it before it curls up too badly. And the nice thing is that this tracing paper, it has kind of a little bit of a slick texture to it, a real smooth texture. So if I paint over it, the paint will stick, but it'll show up a little differently on the tracing paper than it does on the rest of the page. So if I add other layers of materials on top of the tracing paper, it can kind of cover it up. But then sometimes it will, like, it reacts a little bit differently just because it's a different texture, it's a different surface. So I think I'm going to leave that one whole and just go right across the center. And you know, the interesting thing is then that I'm using words, I'm using text. Now, because I wrote with the pink ink, it's not quite as obvious, which I kind of like that. Let go and it curled up. Come on, stop curling. So yeah, the pink ink kind of blends into what's there and is not so obvious. So then, you know, it's like when I see it, it's like I'll know its words, but am I going to sit there and try to read the whole thing? You know, probably not if I'm looking through this. Even if it, you know, I know it's there, but even if I was just a viewer looking through it, I'd probably just see it as text, and I'd catch words, but it's not important that I can read all of it. Now, here's the first of those operative words. So I might be kind of thoughtful, like, oh, okay, that looks like it'd fit right there. Habits of thought right above her picture. That's kind of interesting. I'm gonna trim that off just to make a little bit more space. See if I can get this down without it curling up. So really try to tuck it around there, around the center of the spread. So I mean, I really like how that phrase "habits of thought" just went right above that picture, and so that those two things next to each other start to create a little bit more meaning. And that was something that was completely unplanned. I didn't know that was going to happen. So, but this is just another way that I can tie together pages, and so it goes here and then it comes down here. And it's like I might not, maybe I don't use all of this today. Maybe I do some of it and then come back. Or maybe I skip and I come back down here to where more of the operative words are. I think this, since this stops here, I'm going to have this one maybe pick up down here. I like how sometimes it's at the top or in the middle. Gotta change the blue paper. This glue stick's almost out. I'm gonna have to get out a new one. Another thing I was just thinking of is that if I didn't want to use all the text and I just wanted to focus on the operative words, I could have just cut those out and glued those in different spots. I kind of like this idea of using all of the text in the book. So even though there's words in the book, it's not necessary that a viewer, be able to read them. I often feel like with journaling, it's often more important that you wrote them. So I'm coming up on a spread where there's a face. So I'm kind of looking at a place. I want it to wrap around here, then it will come across. And I think right here at the forehead is probably the straightest spot. So I want to try to bring the words. I could. Oh, there go my dogs. Either my wife's home or there's a delivery or they think somebody's out there. So I could just have that up there like that, which could be the easiest. But I think if I do this, I'm going to cut it. Oh, I love them, but they're nuts. Oops, see, it's running out. So I think it's probably time to get out a new one. Luckily, I have one already. I like to keep the caps. They're great for painting and stamping with. So anyway, so I have that little bit there, and I can turn that this way, and it's going to go right across where I want it to. See, now this is a brand new one, but unfortunately doesn't have that real dark blue. It's been sitting around for a while, so sometimes these are the magic blue Uhu sticks. And so I like the dark blue because you really can see how you've glued. But if the blue disappears and it's still sticky, it still works. It's just that whatever they use to color it is kind of faded. Doesn't mean it's all dried out if it's still sticky. So then I can wrap around. I'm going to maybe do one more. Yeah, like I said, I mean, that's a lot of lines. And I don't think I want to do them all now. I do think it'd be kind of cool to save this and use this later. But with this one, what I want to do is I want to try to make sure it lines up with this. And then that way it just is a continuation. And actually, I think that's perfect. It kind of ends right there. So this is a technique that I use sometimes in the big journal, but not often. I find I use it more in these kind of smaller, more independent books. But now that starts to give me some words. You know, they're a little bit hard to read. Like I said, it's okay that I can't read them all. And you know, I have happy little accidents like that, and I'll keep using this. Maybe I'll use it later this week, or maybe I'll use it next week, or maybe I wait for a while. But kind of thinking about, you know, that text goes through, wraps around, really starts to tie things together. So this, you know, this writing now is linked to the very first page. And so it's like the story is continuing through all of this. But as I go through, you know, it'll be really interesting to see how that text can work through the rest of this as well, because it could be really interesting that it goes through the whole book at some point. But then I do have these big words, so I have the words that I've highlighted can become stepping off points, and that's probably what, you know, maybe what I'll do, maybe not next time, but focus in on some of those bigger themes that have emerged and some of the ideas that came from the writing. So, but anyway, just a different kind of approach to the writing, where I'm not writing directly in the journal, but then the writing gets included in the journal, but then it wraps around. It becomes, or just really becomes part of it with the translucent tracing paper, and then helps tie pages together as it wraps around and goes from page to page. So anyway, that kind of wraps that up for today. So anyway, yeah, so if you have any questions or comments or concerns, pop them into the chat, and I'll try to kind of address them the best that I can. And remember, I do this every day at 3 p.m. I know today I didn't have a chance to pop on and say, hey, I'll be coming on live at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, but every day, every weekday this month, I'm going to try to come on. And then before I go, there's something, you maybe saw a post on Facebook earlier, but I was interviewed for a blog, or for a podcast. So that's out there. It's the Art Ed Radio podcast. It's for art educators, but I talk about not just art ed, talk more about making art and the visual journal, and share a lot of thoughts about both of those and about creativity. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. Like I said, you can find the link on my Facebook page. So anyway, yeah, thank you so much for joining me again. And I'm really enjoying working through this process and sharing it with you all. And if you've missed any of the videos, remember they're recorded, and you can go back and watch them at any time. And I'm also putting them on YouTube, so that way they're all kind of in one place. But anyway, just let me know if you need anything, got any questions, and I'll be back here tomorrow. So thank you so much. And as always, happy creating.